Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the interest that you've shown in this research about the history of Flat River Junior College dating back to 1922 and Mineral Area College dating back to 1965. This has been one of the most interesting experiences of my life, frankly. I've enjoyed every minute of the research that became a far bigger project than I ever imagined it would be. And what I've been able to present in these three parts is actually only 60 to 70% of what I've gathered and collected. Come on in. So, at some point, everything will be put together into a document, and that will be sent to everybody. So, that which I don't have time to talk about during these three sessions because of how much it is, you'll have access to at some future date if you would like to. The first thing I want to do is bring your attention again to this 1882 plat of this land upon which our campus sits. We are about right there. That star is the Gossam Cemetery. And you will notice that SCG, Samuel Cornelius Gossam, owns 80 acres of land. That's where our baseball field is today, the softball field, most of the soccer pitch, the new solar farm, the quarry. All of that is on Gossam land, 80 acres, 1882. You'll also notice that the Gossams owned 40 acres here, and they owned 160 acres on the other side of what is now Highway O. That area where the restaurant is, the Mexican restaurant, used to be Rosner's, used to be a Rosner's Inn. Also, I want to highlight for a second, please, this family, the Hiley family. In 1882, the Hiley family owned 200 acres of land, and that is the area about where our quadrangle is and then south to where our student housing is. And at that point, those 200 acres of land went all the way across what now is Highway 67. Highway 67 was constructed in the late 1950s and the early 1960s, and it cut that Hiley property just about in half, leaving half on one side, including a cemetery that used to be part of this contiguous campus, and a home structure, that black square that you see, which no longer stands, but it's nearby the Hiley Cemetery. You'll notice too, A.J. Gentry, 40 acres. That is where today the North College Center, the new Trio building, about half of the Fine Arts building, about the top third, the north third of the Allied Health building. That is Andrew Jackson Gentry property in 1882. The next year, 1883, that property is sold to the Hardy family, about whom we'll talk in a bit. As you know, it used to be that when a person was sick, they were cared for at home. When a person died, their body was cleaned, prepared, dressed at home. The sitting or viewing happened in the parlor. The person was then usually taken from the home, sometimes to a church, but also sometimes directly to the cemetery. We didn't have the funeral industry that we have today. Now here in St. Francis County, for example, the Cozine Funeral Home was founded in 1864, the last full year of the American Civil War. And part of the reason we had a rise in the funeral industry in the 1860s was because people in Massachusetts wanted to get their dead back from Mississippi during the American Civil War. So embalming processes, for example, improved in the 1860s so that loved ones could have their person back home. But there are here in St. Francis County and in rural areas all across the country small family cemeteries, some of which have been abandoned and are now overgrown. For example, you'll notice the Cunningham family here in St. Francis County, 1882. Does anyone in here have any relations back 100 years ago named Cunningham? It's not a name as familiar here as it used to be. The Cunningham family have 3 cemeteries registered at Find a Grave, small cemeteries like this one that only has about 10 graves. The last person buried there was buried in 1908. James Henry Cunningham, the man you see on the right, was born in Tennessee in 1812, but his family goes back to Virginia. His grandfather was born in Virginia in the 1750s. His grandfather fought in the Revolutionary War and then moved the Cunningham family into Tennessee and then finally into Missouri, where in the late 1800s, the Cunningham family played quite a role in St. Francis County life. Getting a little closer to our home, you have on our main campus the Hardy Cemetery, the Gossam Cemetery, and then right across Highway 67, and in this 1959 aerial photograph, you'll notice that Highway 67 is under construction. In fact, they're creating the quarry we have on our campus because they're digging material out of it to be used for the construction of Highway 67. So on this side of Highway 67, we also have the Hiley Cemetery. These 3 cemeteries used to be on this main plot of land. And you had these families on this main plot of land living, being educated, getting sick, dying, being buried. This is an image from 2007 of our campus, an aerial. You can see across Highway 67, Hiley Cemetery. You can see where the North College Center is, Hardy Cemetery. And then you can see quite near the building and where we're seated right now, the Gossam Cemetery. Since this photo was taken, obviously, we now have the solar farm, and we have the softball field, and we have the soccer pitch. In terms of the Hiley Cemetery across the way, there are only about a dozen graves there. But the Hiley family at one point here in St. Francis County was very well known. They were very much involved in the community. They were an entrepreneurial family. And as they began to pass away, they claimed a spot of earth on their territory to cradle their deceased and disappear them back into the earth, including Martha Howerton Hiley, who is the sister of Narcissa Jane Gossam, who's buried on our main cemetery. The Hiley family in the 1880s had people who served in our county political system. They had a stable over in Farmington. Even as late as 1933, at this Mine Lamont Monument down in Fredericktown, the Daughters of the American Colonies erected it, and on this monument is the name James Hiley, Mrs. James Hiley, who served as the regent. That is satire in the middle, but the Hiley family was so well known that this Republican-leaning newspaper in 1888, sort of a dig at the Democratic Party, put the Hileys in all of the offices of St. Francis County. That wasn't true, but it speaks to how well known the Hiley family was across the state of Missouri. And at the bottom right, you see Carlton Hiley, who was a Farmington High School graduate, a very astute athlete at Farmington High School, then attended Flat River Junior College, and in 1945, in March, he was shot down over Germany and perished there, one of the 22 students who had gone to Flat River Junior College who did not survive the Second World War. To bring this in a little closer and to help you see where we are, here is the ITC building, here's the Gossam Cemetery, and then the other items on the campus you can sort of see projected there behind the mainframe. Those 40 acres up there to Andrew Jackson Gentry, A.J. Gentry, those were sold to the Colin Hardy family in 1883. And they lived on those 40 acres from 1883 until 1892. When they left those 40 acres, they left behind 2 loved ones. There's a very small cemetery in that oval green circle in front of the North College Center. The Hardys arrived in Missouri from Kentucky. They lived first at Big River Mills, and then they purchased this property, and this was where their home was, where that square was. And in fact, that home, or some variation thereof, survived all the way until 1967, when the Board of Trustees of Mineral Area College purchased 6 parcels of land in this area, cobbled together into that original 226-acre college campus. They purchased, the Hardys, those 40 acres from Mr. Gentry in 1883 for $500, which would be about $16,000 in today's money. And they lived there for 9 years until they sold that property to the Columbia Lead Company. If you walk over to that oval green space in front of North College Center, this is the grave marker that you will find. I did not know this grave marker existed when I started this project a bit over a year ago. Dr. Gilgore did not know. Someone mentioned to him they had a loved one buried on the campus. He assumed it was the larger cemetery, and they directed him to this spot. When I first went there to see this, I made an assumption. It says Hardy, Betty Thompson, died in March 1889, and son Amos. My assumption was that this was a mother who died in childbirth. Her son's name was Amos, and they were buried together in March of 1889. Once I did some digging, a little more research, I found that in fact her son had died 2 years prior. He had been accidentally shot by an older brother on a Sunday morning in April 1887. The older brother was about to shoot a chicken. A sister said, "Mom is sleeping, it's Sunday morning, don't wake her up." He went to put the gun down. It fired, discharged, and hit his little brother. This is a newspaper account in the Bloomfield Vindicator, but they're copying it over from the Farmington Times. Last Sunday morning, a sad accidental shooting occurred, which resulted fatally to Buck, that was Amos's nickname, a 13-year-old son of Mr. Colin Hardy. The Hardy family, fortunately, has kept letters that Mrs. Betty Hardy wrote to her sister about the death of her son. Writing shortly after his burial to her sister, Mrs. Hardy wrote this: "It is with a sad heart I write to you. Death has been in our midst and taken little Buck. Oh, Ider," the nickname for her sister, "you cannot know my feeling unless you had lost a dear child. Thompson took his shotgun out to kill a hen. The children was around him, and the gun went off and shot Buck through the bowels. He lived 18 hours. We had 2 good doctors. They could not save him. Buck asked Moni," that would be the sister, Mona, "to sing and pray. I knelt with my children and neighbors and prayed, but I could not sing. My heart was too near breaking. He left a bright evidence that he has gone to heaven. He kissed us all and asked us to meet him in heaven. He sung a beautiful hymn." She finishes the letter to her sister, "I had him buried in my garden where I can be at his grave every day. He was put away nicely. Oh, he loved me so dearly. Anything I wanted, no matter what, he would do it for me." So when the Hardy family left in 1892 to move to St. Genevieve, they left behind the mother and the 13-year-old boy, Buck, who had been killed in that dreadful accident. This particular marker you see here was placed in the 1970s by grandchildren. I don't know what marker was there to indicate the grave site from 1889 when Mrs. Hardy died until the 1970s, but this one was put there with permission of the college that was already on this campus by 1970. I also learned that actually my first thought about Mrs. Hardy having died in childbirth, though incorrect regarding that particular child, Amos, was actually correct. 2 years later, in March of 1889, on the day her last child was born, she died, like so many women in childbirth in the 1800s. This child, Leslie Hardy, lived until 1966. At age 76, he raised a family of his own. He's buried in Bismarck. These are the other Hardy children. Mrs. Hardy and Amos, of course, in bold, are buried on our campus. The other Hardy children are buried in various other locations. Altogether, there were 10 of them, and you can see they started in Kentucky, and then as they came into Missouri, according to the census records, their children started obviously being born here in Missouri. Now, some happy news is that Mr. Hardy, Colin Buchanan Hardy, went on to live a very long life. This is a photograph of the Hardy family in 1916. You will notice a young man here with an arrow pointing down to his head. This is Leslie Quincy Hardy. That's the young man who was born in March 1889 when his mother died. The father of 9 children, including Paul Hardy, and the grandfather of our own Lynn Wisdom here on the campus. Lynn knew that her grandmother was buried on the campus, but she thought that burial was at our main cemetery. She was not aware that it was down at the North College Cemetery. You'll also notice a child there in Mr. Hardy's lap. That child was born in 1914, lived until 2012, died at age 98, that child. Son of Leslie Quincy Hardy, again the man who was born the day his mother died. And he is the father of Beverly Hardy McCulloch. From part 1, you might remember the music teacher at Potosi School System that I pointed out, who'd been a 1962 student at Flat River Junior College. That is Beverly Hardy. And also the father of Mark Hardy, about whom a little bit more in a minute. These are some family photos of the Hardy family. First half of the 20th century. You can see Leslie Paul there on the top right. You can see Mr. Hardy, the one who was born in 1889. You can see him and his wife down at the bottom outside their home. You can see some of the young kids there on the left. And in the second half of the 20th century, the Hardy family and their relationship with Mineral Area College and this land continued. This photo on the left is taken in 1973. The woman there who looks like Lynn Wisdom, because that's her mother, that is Paula Hardy on her first date with Richard Barnes, Lynn Wisdom's father. And this was taken on our campus at the field house at a basketball game in 1973. At the top, you can see Paula Hardy with her child care group in Bismarck, and she was able to get her daycare certification here at Mineral Area College. And in addition to Lynn Wisdom, Lynn's brother Jonathan has been an adjunct in the business department here at the college for a long time. So this association with this land and this institution and the Hardy family goes all the way back to 1883, nearly 150 years ago. And I've learned through this process of research that everyone is tied together, especially in these small rural communities. Everyone has some association with everyone else. Mr. Hardy died at age 95 in 1934 as Esther's oldest citizen. You will notice on his grave marker the birth year is incorrect. It states 1852. He was actually born in 1838. This is something also I've learned through lots of years of research into family history. You cannot trust one document. you need 2 or 3 to confirm a fact. And while generally grave markers are precise because people know they're chiseling something for the ages, there are also sometimes mistakes on grave markers, such as in this case. I mentioned Mark Hardy a second ago. That is Mark Hardy on the upper left. This is the Student Senate here at Mineral Area College, 1970 to 1971, the first full year that we had our new buildings finished and ready to go on this campus. And when I saw this photo, I got in contact with him, just a cold contact via Facebook. He's a former, now retired science teacher at Central. His wife, Dorothy, also earned an associate's degree here at this college. His 2 children, Luke and Lee, took classes here at Mineral Area College. He knew that his grandmother had died. He knew about the accidental shooting death of his great uncle. He did not know they were buried on the campus either. You'll also notice a name that might be familiar, the young man on the bottom far right. His name is John Cohen. He was president of the Student Senate at Mineral Area College, 1970 to 1971. That name Cohen might ring a bell, not for the name of the entrance, which is Cone, but for our creek that runs in the back of the campus, at the northern end of the campus. The Cohen family are the people after whom that creek is named. The Cohen family came here to this area of Missouri in the 1830s. They came from Tennessee. The son of the man who came here, Hardy Cohen, is George DeMoss Cohen. He's photographed there on the left. He was born in 1858. He died in 1864. And the Cohen family also has always been involved in this community and our institution. George Cohen, there at the top middle, was in the very first graduating class of Flat River Junior College in 1924. Other Cohens have come through our institution for some classes or all the way to fulfillment of a degree. And during World War II, these 3 Cohen boys, all from one family, were serving abroad. And this then brings us to our main cemetery on the campus, and that is the Gossam Cemetery. The first person was buried there in 1851. The last person was buried there in 1901. So over a span of 50 years, 12 people were buried in the cemetery. We call it the Gossam Cemetery because there's that great monument with the name Gossam in several locations, because the monument lists the 6 deceased children who are buried in the spot. It lists Mr. Gossam and Mrs. Gossam. But interestingly, the first 2 burials in that cemetery happened before Samuel Cornelius Gossam came to this area from Virginia by way of Kentucky in 1853. The first 2 burials there are of Huddleston family members. Mr. Gossam will marry a widow, Narcissa Jane Howerton Huddleston. That first burial in our cemetery was her 1.5-year-old daughter in 1851. The second burial was her husband, Burl Huddleston, who died in a wagon accident in 1852. Mr. Samuel Gossam then arrives into this area in 1853. At some point, in some fashion, he meets the widow Huddleston. They marry in 1855. They then have a total of 9 children, 6 of whom are buried in our cemetery, 3 of whom lived normal lifespans, moved on to St. Louis. I'll give you a little more of their history in a moment. Another curious point I found was that piece of property I identified, the 40 acres that the Gossams owned, that this college has now owned since 1998, was transferred to the college, increasing the size of our campus, in fact. That was purchased not by Mr. Gossam, not by Narcissa Jane's first husband, Mr. Burl Huddleston. That was purchased in the name of Narcissa Jane Howerton prior to her first marriage. Now, it was unusual at that time period for women to be purchasing property. Once she is married to Mr. Gossam, you will notice that on these plats, it is the name Gossam that is listed for ownership of these pieces of property. But she purchased in 1848 a 40-acre piece of property that now belongs to this institution. The Huddleston family, in 1850 census, they are listed here next to the Howerton family. The Howerton family, that's Narcissa Jane's mother and father and her older siblings. At the bottom, you see Burl Huddleston. That's Narcissa Jane's first husband. Their two children, William F. and Martha J. And this is before the death of the child who will be born at about 1850, because that child is buried in 1851 at a year and a half. Martha, by the way, is the one who will marry a Hiley as well, a Mr. Hiley. These are the children of the Gossams. Samuel Cornelius is at the top. He was born in Virginia. Narcissa Jane was born here in Missouri, and these are their 9 children. Everyone listed here is buried in our cemetery with the exception of those 3 in dark font. Those 3 Gossam boys who grew to be adults are all buried together in the same cemetery in St. Louis, Valhalla Cemetery. We know with particularity these dates and these names because Mr. Gossam instructed that an obelisk be placed at the cemetery where he and his wife and their 6 children were to be buried, and that contains all of their names and their birth years and their death years. Speaking of Mr. Gossam, this is the will that was filed about 9 months before he died in St. Francis County, and he spelled out quite clearly what he wanted in that cemetery. He gave explicit instructions about what was to become of his estate. For example, of course, every debt needs to be paid, followed up by he wants to be buried by his wife, Narcissa Jane, on his farm. That's this property. He wants a single suitable monument. These are all his words. To the memory of myself, my beloved wife, and to my beloved children, now deceased. A monument to be enclosed by a good and substantial iron fence. Said fence to have a neat and substantial rock foundation. And Mr. Gossam set aside $1,500, which would be about $50,000 in today's money, for the construction of the monument, the construction of the small rock wall upon which he wanted the substantial iron fence. Over time, these have disappeared. Perhaps initially his children did not do explicitly what he wanted. I've not seen evidence of a rock foundation up there, but there definitely was a fence at some point, a wrought iron fence. That is now decayed. Also, Mr. Gossam, prior to his death by several years, he completed a quitclaim deed with St. Francis County, in which he gave up ownership of that 1 acre of property upon which that cemetery was built to St. Francis County under some Missouri General Assembly resolutions that allowed such, and also gave him and his family in perpetuity, forever, the right to be buried in that cemetery. No one was ever buried in the cemetery after 1901 when Mr. Gossam died, but legally, theoretically, a Gossam descendant, of which there are some, could still be buried at the cemetery. And I've heard from 3 people in general services that they have found over the years small rocks with numbers lined up as though there had been an intention that there would be other people buried in that cemetery between the place where you see the markers now and the actual road. Mr. Gossam was born to an old Virginia family in the 1830s, not too far from George Washington's home. He was a sailor when he was in his teens on a coastal vessel there off the coast of Virginia. He arrived in Missouri by way of Kentucky in 1853, probably using the plank road over from St. Genevieve that had been newly constructed at the time. When he arrived in Missouri in his early 20s, he was a school teacher for a short period. At 22, he married the widow, Narcissa Huddleston, who was 23. During the American Civil War, like about half of Missourians, he was a die-hard Confederate. He remained a Confederate, completely unreconstructed for the rest of his life. He was a farmer and a grocer. There is now a First State Community Bank in Farmington. It used to be the Farmington Public Library. It is on that piece of earth that his grocery store was located in the late 1800s. The father of 8 sons, the father of 1 daughter. He tried to be elected to the Missouri General Assembly in 1878, but did not get the nomination, but was successful in being elected to the Missouri General Assembly, the 33rd session. And in fact, I got that photograph from the Missouri State Archive because they take official photos of everyone who's elected to the General Assembly now and going far into the past. While he was in the Missouri General Assembly, the type of legislation he put forth, at least as recounted in newspaper articles, had to do with mine safety, quite reasonable, coming from the lead belt. Also, the ability of a farmer to put a lien on the property of someone who had taken produce from them and never paid them back. The most interesting one and colorful piece of legislation that Mr. Gossam proposed was that these magnificent circus flyers that would be posted all over a town for weeks before the circus came to town, that they had to abide by truth in advertising. He did not like the idea that a circus company would put this most magnificent set of images on the cover, and then you would walk under the tent and into the tent, and it would be quite a deflation of expectations. So he proposed legislation that would require circus companies to engage in truth in advertising. This newspaper article in 1885 calls him a man with a level head because of his attempt at truth in advertising. He served only 1 term in the Missouri General Assembly. He then retired. He returned to this land, this farm, and his grocery store in Farmington that also had an apartment on the top floor. He continued to be engaged in his community, including here in an 1889 photo where he's serving on a grand jury. And you'll notice below his name is the name Cunningham. Once again, that same family that we looked at the beginning of the talk. Mrs. Gossam died in 1894. Mr. Gossam became aged and ill, perhaps with dementia. This 1898 article in the Bonne Terre Register talks about Uncle Sam being seriously ill. He was actually then moved to his son James's house in St. Louis. You can see that appearance in 1900. He spent a lot of time in hospitals in St. Louis, including Missouri Baptist Hospital, where he one more time made the news. It seems that he left the hospital, disappeared, was gone the entire day, and they found him at the city hospital, another hospital altogether, sleeping on a couch in a doctor's office. He died in 1901 at the age of 68. His body arrived at Farmington Wednesday at noon and was taken to the old family burying ground, about 6 miles northeast of town, meaning Farmington, and laid at rest by the side of his wife. May he rest in peace. That was the last burial in our cemetery. Now, I mentioned that Mr. Gossam was a Confederate. Mr. Gossam was also from Virginia. He came from a family that had long engaged in enslavement. And of course, enslavement was also something in Missouri that was practiced semi-widely. Missouri, according to the 1820 Missouri Compromise, was a slave state. I want to show you one image here. This is a map of Missouri looking at the slave registers for St. Francis County in 1850. 154 St. Francis Countyans were enslavers, and there were 672 enslaved people in St. Francis County. In 1860, at a time when one would have thought that moral conversation in the 1850s around slavery would have decreased involvement in slavery, in St. Francis County actually it had increased to 211 slave owners and 883 enslaved people. This was a very conservative and democratic area. When Abraham Lincoln ran for election in 1860, for example, while he got 10% of the vote in Missouri, he got only 1.6% of the vote in St. Francis County. Now, the good news is, by 1864, he got 65% of the vote in St. Francis County. So there was a real mind shift among countyans during that period of the American Civil War. Mr. Gossam, according to the 1860 slave schedule, did have one enslaved person on his property, a 45-year-old. Charles Evans, who owned the property now where our Early Learning Academy and our entrance to the campus are, had 3 enslaved persons, a 46-year-old man, a 34-year-old female, and a 13-year-old child. You will also notice that the Howertons had enslaved persons. Most people in St. Francis County had fewer than 10 enslaved people. This is an exception. John Perry, according to the 1850 slave schedule in this county, had 53 enslaved people. I looked at the slave registers in 1850 and 1860, and then I went back to this 1882 plat of St. Francis County. All of those places that you see a red star, those are names of people who were named in 1850 or 1860 on the slave register. And Uncle Sam, as the newspaper account at his death in the Democrat Argus put it, was an antebellum St. Francis Countyan who followed the fortunes of Sterling Price through the Civil War, and a Confederate general. Now, before we leave the cemetery that we call the Gossam Cemetery, that really started as a Huddleston cemetery, we did engage. Colton here organized it in May 2025. We engaged in a nice cleaning of the grave markers at the cemetery. Dr. Zaromsky was part of that process. That photo there on the right actually has been cleaned once more since then, so it looks even better than on the right, but you can compare it to the one on the left, and that cleaning process was quite successful in terms of making those grave markers more legible. This is Burl Huddleston's grave marker, the second one put in the cemetery in 1852. It was probably the dirtiest of all of those in the cemetery after 175 years, and it cleaned up pretty nicely. This is Thomas Gossam's grave marker. It has been there since 1856, and it also cleaned up fairly well. We are now at the process of putting a fence around the Gossam Cemetery and around the Hardy Cemetery over at North College Center. Recently, we had 4 different choices to select from, and individually, without being even in each other's presence, Brandon and Rodney and Colton and Dr. Z and I all picked letter A. Hopefully that's satisfactory for everyone. Letter A will go up around our large cemetery. Letter B, which is actually letter A but in a smaller version, will go up around the cemetery over at North College Center. I want to end talking about the 3 Gossam sons who survived. 6 Gossam children are in the cemetery with their mother and father. 3 Gossam children survived. Jeremiah went by Jerry, James Howard, and Samuel Cornelius Jr. Samuel Cornelius died in 1928, James Howard in 1923, and Jerry in 1930. This is Jerry Gossam. He was an attorney. He practiced in Farmington. His office was in the Farmington Courthouse, not the one we have now from the 1920s, but the one immediately preceding it. He was an interesting character. I find a lot in the local newspapers about him. Sometimes it's a little difficult to really follow the trajectory of his life. He seems to have been married a couple of times. There may have been a divorce with one wife. Perhaps there was a death of one wife. He got himself into some trouble. He had to have the governor of Missouri issue a pardon. You had all sorts of citizens in St. Francis County writing letters to the governor about what a good person he was and why he needed to be pardoned so he could run for probate judge here in St. Francis County. He seemed to have feuds with people, and he would type these very long essays and put them in newspapers justifying what he had done and why he was right and why he was being falsely accused. So he was an interesting character. He, in 1902, ran for judge of the probate court. This was when he had to get the pardon from the governor. He lost that election to that man, Gilbert O. Nations. I bring his image up because when I went to explore Mr. Nations, I found that he ran for president of the United States in 1924 it was called the American Party. It was sort of a white nationalist, Klan-endorsed, anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant party in the 1920s. Sort of just a blip on the radar. He didn't do very well. They weren't on all the state ballots, but a St. Francis Countyan born in Perry County, someone who had been in office here in St. Francis County, did actually legitimately run for president in 1924. Now, Jerry Gossam ends up losing another election to be prosecuting attorney here in St. Francis County, and he's done with us. He moves down to Caruthersville near Cape Girardeau, Kentucky-Tennessee border. He is elected down there, but not without controversy. He's accused of some misdeed down in Caruthersville, but he's completely exonerated in a trial. But Jerry Gossam's life is sort of like that. For example, he had a foot injury that was debilitating the rest of his life, and there are two stories. He accidentally fell in front of the train in Bonne Terre, or he was pushed there in the midst of a fight. So there's all sorts of questions that I've not been able to pin down totally. His other brother, Samuel Gossam, stayed out of the newspapers, stayed out of the press, wasn't gossiped about. I can't find a photograph of him anywhere. He did not have any children, nor did Jerry. And usually photos get passed down to offspring, and if you don't have offspring, you're less likely to have your images preserved. What sort of puts Samuel Gossam on the map is that he will become president of a bank that the Gossam brothers will organize. I'll talk about that for a moment. But he sells this property in St. Louis on Locust, and this property ends up becoming a very famous street in St. Louis early in the time of the automobile industry, the different Model Ts and Fords and such. And that is his home that he had constructed, that he sold to be part of this automobile road in which they had different automobiles in the showroom and items you might need for the automobile, to repair it. That is what the home looks like now. It is still standing. So that's sort of his touch to fame. James H. Gossam is pictured here with 5 of his 6 children. There was one child born after this photograph was taken in about 1911 or 1912. That child was named Woodrow Wilson, a good name named during World War II when Woodrow Wilson was the president. One thing I found interesting about James Gossam is that initially he owned a saloon up in St. Louis, about where the Ballpark Village is now, is where his saloon was. And in order to marry his wife, the family history goes, he had to give up the saloon and go into the dry goods business, which he did. But at some point, he purchased accidentally, a ton of umbrellas. The family history says he might have been tipsy when he did it. He had these umbrellas in storage for several years when the 1904 World's Fair came to St. Louis. He and his children happened to be there one day when it started raining. No one was selling umbrellas. He got the bright idea to bring all of the umbrellas out of storage, begin selling them there at the St. Louis World's Fair, and the story goes he sold them all finally. The 3 boys, near the end of their life, got together and they founded a bank, the Hodemont Bank in St. Louis. They had a small branch in Caruthersville where Jerry Gossam lived. This was the 1920s when, as you may or may not know, there were a lot of bank robberies. This was sort of the beginning of our modern FBI to investigate bank robberies. And that bank, that Hodemont Bank, on 3 occasions, 1921, 1926, and 1927, was robbed. Shots were fired in 1926, and in 1927, one of the employees was actually murdered at the bank. As happens to all of us, eventually the Gossam boys did die. 1923, 1928, 1930. They were gathered together again at the Valhalla Cemetery in St. Louis. Jerry and Sam Gossam are buried there side by side, or one on top of the other. James Gossam, who had children, bought a whole plot of graves, a total of 12, in about 1914, and he's buried there, his wife is there, and all of his children are there except for the one who moved to Texas, and he is buried in Texas. I went to the cemetery, and the woman gave me the card here and let me take a photo of it, but it shows the 12 plots he purchased, 1914, who's buried where. There's still plots 4, 5, and 6 available for future. Now, that Hodemont Bank continued after the Gossam sons were dead, but as you know, in October 1929, the stock market crashed, the Great Depression commenced, and the banking industry across the United States was in poor shape. That would include the Hodemont Bank, which did in fact go under in 1933, and this Time magazine issue from 1933 actually references that bank as sort of the beginning of a decline in the banking system in St. Louis and the failure of several small banks. The building in which their bank was housed still stands. It's in bad shape now, in a rough neighborhood, but it seems to be fairly sound. The Gossam family, of course, because one of the sons, James, had children, continues to this day. I've been in touch with 3 Gossam descendants, one who lives in St. Louis, one who lives in Texas, and one who lives in Colorado. This is the one in Texas I've been in touch with. He ends up becoming a county judge as well in Texas, but he's now retired. And that, friends, brings us to the end of the conversation about the cemeteries on our campus and about this land. Our college now is 60 years old. In April of 1965, the people of this area voted to create the Junior College District of Mineral Area. In October 1965, we changed our name from Flat River Junior College to Mineral Area College. I have learned in this process that this institution is not afraid of change. And we try things, and if they don't work, we let them go and we try something else. I have stood in awe of the way in which each Board of Trustee, beginning in 1965, when this college started, up to this day, how the trustees study matters, provide their input, and working with administration, are not afraid of doing something different, trying something new. And some of those things are outlined here in this long list of events that we have witnessed on this property where the Hardys once lived, where Andrew Jackson Gentry once lived, where the Gossams lived. Expansion of the property, expansion of the buildings, new presidents, new ways of providing education. And in April of this past year, at the 60th anniversary, all of these employees were part of this MAC community that dates back to 1922, and it has been an enormous privilege and a pleasure. It has been inspirational, educational, and uplifting for me over the past year to dive into our history and to rescue some of it before it was gone and document it for ourselves and for those who will follow us. Thank you so much for being interested. Thank you, everybody. It looks like I have a question. Yes.
The first husband of the Gotham lady, you said died in a, you quoted, wagon accident.
Well, Mrs. Gossom's first husband, Burl Huddleston, died in what came down in the family history described as a wagon accident. I'm guessing the wagon was turned over, the horses got away, something happened, and he was probably crushed. That's all I know is a wagon accident, and that was 1851. And Liz, you have a question?
Yeah, is that, you mentioned the Hodimont Bank.
Yes.
Talk about this, is that name any connection with the Hodimont?
It's that whole community in Wellston.
Borderlands?
It's that community in Wellston, just north of Forest Park, not quite in University City.
Okay.
It used to have a famous line. Yes, exactly.
Streetcar line. Okay,
That's right.
streetcar line,
Right
and
down
it
to
was
where near this bank was.
It was the last, wasn't that the same?
Last stop.
The last stop
That's
before
right.
you would get into what's now St. Louis County.
Yep, you got it. Yes.
Mine is not a question, but an appreciation. I want everyone to know this is something that HR approached him about, and he went above and beyond. This is not something the college said, hey, we're going to throw a bunch of money at you. Rodney knew that what he was doing through this process is going to outlive all of us to be able to tell the story of this college for perpetuity. And I just wanted to say thank you.
And thank you. And after working all weekend on this project and realizing I have 253 pages of images and I've written 27,500 words of accompanying text, for a moment I thought, what if I die tonight? I sent an email to these two gentlemen and said, please, if I die, make certain this gets printed out and placed in our libraries. And you said you would do it.
I gave you my word.
But I'm still here. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure.